Hello, I'm Linda Polin, professor in the Graduate School of Education and Psychology, and I teach in a hybrid doctoral program that focuses on learning technologies. So I come with some advantages. First off, we're studying learning, and secondly, we're studying technology, and thirdly, we're doing it partly online. So I've got a lot of experience in this area, and we're now in our 17th year of doing this. So we've been through versions and versions and versions of ways to do it. And I like to think I've learned a few things that I want to share with you. And in particular, I'm going to be focusing on asynchronous discussion, or what we call forums, or in the old days, news groups, where students can respond or put a posting up at different times of the day. They don't have to all be co-present at the exact same moment writing. Like you, we use Sakai, and we use the Sakai forums, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how that works. And I also want to add, I'm going to be, at the end, tail end, throwing in a little bit about my use of podcasting, because I don't just podcast lectures, I use podcasts for feedback, and I use podcasts to sort of augment reading as well. The goal for forums for me is participation and engagement, right? So the important element is getting students to realize it counts. It's part of the course. It's not just an option. And one of the things that most of us in the program do is put an explicit weighting on participation in forums. And depending on the group, I have been known to jack it up as high as 30% or take it down as low as 10%. Depending on their responsiveness, because some groups are very reluctant to engage and others are overly type A engaged. So you have to figure out what you've got and adjust accordingly. And I also include at 4 weeks and 12 weeks general feedback to the class that shows them the average number of postings with a standard deviation, and mostly I do this to sort of control the outliers. So you can pull your stats out of the Sakai statistics, and you can discover that you've got one person posting 100 times and someone else posting 20. Well, the best place is somewhere in the middle of that. So I can lay that out, not put names on it, and suggest to people that they self-regulate. If they know they're sort of at the high end, maybe they should reel it in a little, and if they know they're at the low end, maybe they should pump it up a bit. So I try to do that at least twice at the end of the first month, because it's kind of hard the first month. You're new to the content. And then again around the 12th week, which is kind of your last chance to get your act together before the end of the semester. But good posting in forums requires trust, and it requires trust with the instructor and trust between the posting peers. And at the beginning of the semester, I tend to be overly present in forums to try and set the tone, put up some model postings, mediate some of what students say, and I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. And then as the semester goes on, I try to back out a bit. All right, so that's a good instructional strategy, but you have to explain it to the students, because there are students who will wonder, why didn't you answer my post? Why did you answer his post? So I also make a point of telling them, I have a fairly long section in my syllabus where I explain how this works. And I tell them, if I don't answer your posting, it doesn't mean I don't love you. It just means I have nothing to say. And I'm not going to just answer everybody and go, yep, good, all right, star for you, star for you. I'm only going to respond when I have something to add, and you should do the same. And I tell them, please, let's not have, I agree with Bob, I agree with Rex. Let's try and do something useful. So I want to show you one of the prompts I use on the syllabus, if I can remember where I put it. So this is an excerpt from the syllabus, and I'll give you a sec to sort of look through that. But, I did leave in the part where I say, I thought I took that out, where I say, actually, in the syllabus, some of you think you can learn a lot by just reading, and that's your excuse for why you're not posting. Well, I learn a lot from just reading what other people say. And I tell them explicitly, well, I'm sorry, that doesn't work in this class. You have to demonstrate. You have to actively engage. You have to work it over in your mind. You have to put words to your ideas so that you try out the language and you try out the idea. And I also explicitly explain what participation is. And I make it as broadly based as possible. So there's a place for everybody at the table. So you can help other people. You can bring in resources and put links up, but you can't just throw up a link. You have to explain the link. You can interact with what someone else has already said. You can put up something provocative of your own. So I try to open that up. And then I also, you'll see in bold, give them really clear directions on how to come up with an idea to put in a posting. Take an idea that's already on the table in discussion and extend it to its logical conclusion, or think about it in a different situation or a different place. Offer an illustration from work. We're very much focused on the real world here, so we want to make sure the university connects to the real world. And I always tell the students, I bring the theory, you bring the real world, we'll meet in the middle. So they can offer an illustration from the workplace or a hypothetical. They can make a counter proposal and argue. Don't have to agree with everything I say or everything someone else says. Provide clarification, ask for a rationale, why do you think that's true, or here's what I meant when I said blah, blah, blah. Share the relevant resources I mentioned. And the other one that I really like is connect ideas across courses or within a course. Reach back to something we've had earlier and make a connection. Or talk about how this is relevant to what you were just talking about in leadership and hook that in too. So if you have no idea what to post, you ought to be able to figure out something here. Another thing I make a big deal about is the use of forums to understand readings. And when you are posting about the readings, which you're supposed to be doing weekly, you need to give us a page number, put up a quote. You can say why you like it, why it appeals to you, why you hate it, why it confuses you. You have to say something about the quote, but that's another good way to get started in a forum is, you've got to read a chapter. What did you underline? Put it up there. Tell us what page it's on, which is always tricky for my Kindle people who have to say, well, it's about X% in underneath this header, but they manage to do it. And that's another way for someone to get started if they're not sure what to write about. And that's pretty good. That works pretty well. And I do have this emphasis so people know they need to be putting something up on forums. All right, so the real discussion killer, if you want to kill a discussion, is ask a reading comprehension question. That's something I made the mistake of doing once at the very beginning, and I recently did it again. I'm not sure why I did it, but I asked, well, what do you think X means in the chapter? And the first guy in there nailed it, and that left 18 people with nothing to say. So it was a total conversation killer. Don't ever ask reading comprehension questions. Try to find a way to make it provocative, or to ask people to illustrate it, or something that's got more traction than just one right answer. So that's been an important piece of learning through doing here for us. So this is a post from one of my current classes, and it's a qualitative methods class, and they've been reading a document by the author Brema. And you'll see that the student has obligingly put up page numbers and talked about them. And we always try to offset the quotes so you can see them. And this, got people going. So people were able to pick up with this and move forward. The other thing I tell people is don't go below the fold. There's an expression in popular culture, TLDR. Too long, didn't read. People will put that up on pop culture blogs and things. And that happens as well in forums. Beginning students, when they first come in, have a tendency to write their response in Microsoft Word, edit it beautifully, do a full page, and then paste it into the forum. And nobody wants to read it. because it's too long, and it's like, this is supposed to be more conversational. This is an extension, at least for me, an extension of conversation. And I tell students, we can have an informal tone. I'm fine with that. What's more important is the content. So, don't hog your turn. Don't paste things in from Word. Do it while you're there and in the moment, responding to somebody. So that's kind of a standing joke about don't paste it from Word, and don't go below the fold, which in this case, like the front page of the newspaper, is a screenful. Don't go below a screenful if you can avoid it, because no one wants to read it. This is an example. This is a pretty decent response someone made. Someone in the prior post, as you can tell, went out and found an additional resource and posted and talked about it. This student was intrigued enough to go read the other student's resource that she put up there, and to take it even further and connect it to our current reading. So this is pretty sophisticated engagement, peer-to-peer, about both the readings and things from outside the readings being brought in. And it is possible to get there with these sorts of forums. Now, one of the questions people sometimes have is, well, what about you? Where are you in this? And as I said at the beginning, I try to be there a lot and shape things. As the semester goes on, I try to back off. I will do things like connect people's posts, point out that what this person said is related to what that person said. I will give people feedback that sort of directs them to a section of the reading or directs them to an assignment, so that to help them make the bridge connection. I avoid telling people they're right or wrong, or better or worse, or the only right answer on the page, or anything like that that's going to kill people's engagement. I don't use forums as compliance checks, and that just kills the engagement. People like to feel that they're more in a classroom seminar than that they're at a place where things are being ticked off. How many did you post? Did you say something about this? Did you have the answer to that? So I don't do compliance checks or ask reading comprehension questions. And there is wait time. We talk in K-12 education about wait time in the classroom, where the teacher asks a question and you need to wait for the students to give them time to think about it and post. And there is, or speak, there is wait time in the forums as well. When you throw out an idea, it's hard, but you have to sort of give people a chance. Just because you wrote it on Monday morning at 10 o'clock doesn't mean they've read it on Monday. They may not read it till Wednesday, or they may not read it till the weekend. So you need to be open to a larger response time on your forums. Now, having said that, one of the tricks, I may have to log back in. I got timed out. Whoops. One of the tricks I'm going to show you has to do with moving people along and avoiding the last-minute posters, the guys who drop in at the last minute and try and put up 4 or 5 postings in the hope that you will count them as participation. There's always those guys. And you can see it in the statistics if you open the statistics. Let me go here. I think I've got these going on. Forums. All right, so here we go. You'll notice at the bottom of the page here, these guys have little locks on them. These are prior forums from the early part of the semester these were 4 articles they had to read and comment on. And at some point in the announcements, I said, okay, I think we're done with that. I'm going to lock these up now, and you can go into forum settings and just say no new postings. They can still read them, if they want to go back and look at the thinking that happened at the early part of the semester, they can do that. But it's very easy to go to topic settings, go down the bottom of the page, and just lock, I won't do it now or they'll all freak out, but you can lock the topic just like that, disable postings. I give them a warning, like on a Monday I'll say, okay, a couple more days I'm going to lock down that topic. It's time to move on. And that does have the effect of getting people to sort of let go. Sometimes you have the feeling they've read one book and that's the only book they're going to post on. But once you close that off, it sort of forces everybody to move down the road onto the next reading. So I use that quite a bit as a trick. And like I say, just give them a heads up so you don't get, totally mess up their schedules, because a lot of people do things in the evening or at night. I was going to show AJ's discussion killer, where he wrote the multi-page forum posting that everyone just went, oh. So we had a little talk with AJ, and he now understands not to go below the fold. Let me show you one other thing I do sometimes, and this one you want to save. This is like your ace card. If things are going well, oops, let's go home. I might call a hiatus. If a lot of posting is going on and things are really moving, I might give them a little reward. Say, all right, let's just take this week off, focus on your paper or go do something for Paul's class while I go through all your postings. And if you save that and sort of have it as this little reward you drop in a particular week, it really makes people feel like you're paying attention to the amount of effort they're putting into it. It's like they feel like, hey, I've been really working and working and working. Is she even noticing? And then you can say, yeah, things are going really well. You guys are the best. Let's take a week, catch your breath, do something for another class while I sort of get back through these. So that's another kind of both indicator that you're paying attention, and then kind of a little reward system for encouraging them to be proactive in the forums. So like I said, with assessment, I will look at week 4 and week 12 and give them a little feedback on the amount of posting. But I've got another little trick, and I have to give props to the person I stole it from, a woman named Sarah Havind, who works at Terc, T-E-R-C, in Cambridge, Mass. This was something I liberated from her collection. What she has sometimes done, especially with problematic classes, is include explicitly an assignment that counts for participation, where you ask a student to go out and find a posting that they've made during the semester that they felt moved the class forward. So you're kind of asking people to self-assess. Go back in, show me your best shot. And if that's clear on the syllabus ahead of time, people are aware that they're going to have to find that at some point in time. So that kind of says to them explicitly, I'm expecting that you've got something good to show me. The other thing I have them do sometimes is ask them, go out and identify in the forums a posting that one of your peers made that you felt made things clearer for you or moved the class forward. And the interesting thing about that, and I have them like literally paste it into a paper and then tell me why it's your best post, or why it's good, or why that person, or how that person helped you. What's interesting about that is it sometimes gets you to focus on people you didn't realize were doing a very good job of helping their peers. Sometimes as instructors, we always see the shiny people. They're really obvious to see. And there's other times where there's people who are sort of in the middle, but are doing a really good job of helping other people. And an assignment like that can help you see, oh, wow, Bob's really good at helping people understand that complex task. I should move Bob to the forefront a little more and get him involved. So that's been a very useful, clever little trick that I stole from Sarah, that I have used from time to time. And it also helps students find value in each other, because one of the things that is difficult at the beginning is getting students to stop writing to you and to write to each other, to respond to each other. And at the beginning of the semester, when I'm in forums, I try to use names. I'll say Alan, comma, I really love, so it's clear that I'm addressing Alan. I'm not just expounding for the world. And at some point, they start to be more peer-to-peer interactive as well. But that's another way of sort of getting them to look at their peers as resources. And it's an assessment. I've had students send me private email when that assignment is due, saying, how had a little trouble finding a good posting to use to prove that I was contributing to the class, and I think I'm going to have to up my game a little. So it's a nice sort of self-reflective moment for students. Now I want to talk a little bit about podcasts. Were there some other questions relevant to forums that maybe I should hit on?
Yeah. You kind of touched on it already by mentioning that at the beginning you maybe have a little bit more high-touch involvement within the forums, but as things go along, ideally you're much more in the background. What do you think, professors are often saying, what is the expected involvement of the professor in these discussions? How would you help professors understand what their role and how often they should be reading, responding to messages?
Excellent. Okay. I read everything, and I probably go in at least 3 times a week, if not more. So I'll do a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or I'll do a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or, I sort of spread it out. Depends on how active the group is. And what I'm mostly looking at is who's participating, what is on the table for discussion, where there are problems. And one of the things that, I didn't even think of this as a tip, but it actually is one. One of the things I do in my forums is I separate academic content from the moaning and whining. So we usually have a forum specifically for moaning and whining. And that way you sort of, by taking it out and compartmentalizing it, you're saying, this is not academic, it goes over here, and we can talk about things, but I don't want it tainting what we're doing here in the class. So this Help Dr. Polin is based on some feedback I got on an evaluation from the previous semester. So I put it up there. I said, someone said this, what do y'all think about that? Then I was concerned that for task 1 that they might need a library brush up. Should we invite Maria back in? That's not an academic content, but it's an anxiety, and I needed to address it. I did not put up the dead grandmother phenomenon. That was actually put up by a student who was talking about that. What we have, like the logistics section, if you want to complain about how long the paper has to be or when it's due or how it coordinates with another class, you can put that there. So I try to separate out that kind of stuff. I will push students by retaking some of what they've written and putting it into my response and then explicitly responding to what they've written. Instead of just making general comments, I try to do that. I ask them to put up a discussion around any big paper that's coming up because I want to know about the crises before I get the paper. And try and avoid people saying, I didn't know you had to X, so here's the place where we can discuss that kind of stuff. I guess I try to keep the forums very seminarish. So if I did one time look at the statistical value of my contributions, and I'm occupying about 30% of the floor. And I actually did a research paper, now that I think of it, I actually did a research paper on this with a new instructor, an instructor who was new to online teaching. And she started out hugely occupying the floor. She had about 65% of the posts. That's way too much teacher talk. But what was interesting is over time, she managed to pull herself back. So I think she got more comfortable as well. But I try to stay under a third. It should mostly be them talking to each other, because that's how I find out what they understand and what they don't understand. If it's me talking, I already know this stuff. I need to hear what they think it means. So the more floor they have, the easier it is for me. And I can come in and shape things. So if somebody's really off, I won't say, Alan, I'm sorry, that's just like you're totally wrong on that. Instead, I'll try to ask a question, I'm not sure you're understanding what they meant by this term. Does anyone else have like a better way to explain it? Try and invite in a peer contribution that might actually end up being more understandable than my own if I just told the answer. So I try to hook people up and keep the discussion lively. I might sometimes I'll get to the end of a post thread and say, I think we've beaten this horse. It's dead. Let's move on. And really, literally close off the discussion. Let's see, this group is pretty yucky. Let me go to one of their biggies, food banks, where cheese goes to die. This was a research article that they read. So I began. What are they trying to accomplish? We can see people trying to post here. I don't know if at the end I said I think we're done or not. The other thing that people need to understand, students need to understand, is when they reply to a forum, they can change the subject header. And sometimes in a very long thread that's useful because there's a lot of sidewalking. People sort of head off in another direction. And if you're a student or a teacher and you want to know what's going on, where are we going? It's useful to have people, let's see if I can, this one's locked so I can't post to it, but let me go to one I could post to and I'll show you what I mean. All right, so this looks totally new. All right, so I found an old paper, blah, 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 blah. Here's some, here's some, here's some. Oh, see, somebody already did this. Now I could reply to her. And when I go to reply, this is totally editable. I can totally change this and say, this reminds me of something I read last year or last semester. I can put a new subject header in. And that helps people who are reading the threads to know where you're going. I encourage students to do that quite a bit. Let's go back. So that's another way to sort of have a presence. I mean, you can't not be there. If you're not there, nobody's going to post because everyone knows they're doing it for you to notice. It's like, you know, we know it's an academic game at some level. We want you to know we're here and we're posting. But you also want to lay back as much as you can. Model stuff up front. Another piece of this, forum settings. Let's go down to forum settings. Here's the place where you can lock it, by the way, when you're no longer interested in having that conversation go on. Another thing you can do that I think is useful for me is I can take the student role, and you need to do this because the default settings don't come up this way. Students need to be able to edit and delete their own postings. I think that's fair. Otherwise, it's hard to establish trust and allow risk if you have to be that careful. I mean, one of the reasons they're in Microsoft Word before they post is because of exactly this issue. So I don't let them edit or post or delete other people's postings, but they can definitely do their own. The other thing I do is I check new topic because I think it's important for students to be able to initiate discussion and not just wait for me. Also, as an instructor, it takes a load off me. I don't have to come up with everything we're going to talk about. If some student found a different part of the chapter interesting, they should be able to start a discussion on that. So that's something I do. On occasion, I'll do a new forum, but forums are tricky for setting up if you don't know what you're doing. So I try to keep it to just topics. But that is something I recommend you investigate. Makes it more compelling when they have power. So what was your third question? You had a third one.
Well, thankfully you've covered a lot of it, such as how to keep students engaged dynamically during the discussion by you're mentioning giving them prompts, reacting, but then asking follow-up questions, asking for clarification.
Asking to tie it to the readings explicitly.
Right.
Separating the logistical stuff from the academic stuff I think is important. Locking down completed discussions and pushing people along. Giving them the power to start their own threads. I think these are ways you make it a much more living, dynamic experience and less a Q&A kind of experience with guess what the professor's thinking. Like I said, I go in about 3 or 4 times a week. I'll read stuff. Now, Sakai's kind of weird this way. Actually, Blackboard was too. The way you can mark things read or not read. If you look at this, you can see here's a new posting. I can go to this posting And because I opened it as an individual entity, it will show as been read, that it's been read. But if I just read it as part of a long stream of things, if I just do my reading, which I tend to do as a long stream because I want to get a sense of the context, it won't necessarily, even though I've looked at that, it won't know that I've read it and it won't mark it read. So at the end of that time, I can come up here and click Mark All as Read, which I just probably should not have done since there were new ones. But I'll figure it out. And that's a good way to, there's nothing more depressing than logging into forums and finding there's 40 unread postings. And you're thinking, oh man, I'm going to need a lot of coffee for this one. So make sure you're ticking off the ones that you've read. That's another important piece. All right, so those are the main, I think, things here. I don't grade them explicitly. I will, the other thing that I do, and let me open something just so I can do it. And I'll do it to myself so I don't reveal anybody. I can email here. That's an individual reply. And if someone puts up a particularly powerful or well-written or engaging or clever or well-linked or some other beneficial kind of posting, I will email them and say, that was a really good post. I appreciate the time and thought, blah, 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 blah. Because that encourages them to continue to do that. And then we'll go to them privately. So it's not like you've shown everybody that, like, this guy's cool and you're not. You haven't fingered somebody as this teacher's pet. But I have found students really appreciate that kind of personal touch. And it also prevents you from having those stupid postings where you go, oh, like Bob said, that was good. You don't want to have those postings. You want to have meaningful postings as well. So that's another element, I think. I guess those are the main things on forums. I wanted to step into podcasts briefly, if I could. And then if there's more questions, I'll take them. I've got 3 examples here that are different than I think you typically find people doing with podcasts. Oftentimes you'll see, especially now with the flipped classroom and inverted classroom, an effort to sort of push lecture to podcasts, which students love. Actually, they would love it if they could peel the audio out of Illuminate sessions and put it on their iPod. But we haven't figured out how to do that for them yet. So what I found myself doing when I'm reading papers is you hit this wall at about the 8th or 9th paper where if you've been taking notes, where you realize, oh, there's like a common misconception here, or there's a set of problems that most of the papers have, and I could write it on each guy's paper, or I could put together a bunch of comments that are directed to the group as a whole. So I will do that, and I don't know that actually one of these is one of those, but I'll do a podcast where I say, I've noticed on all your papers you're all doing this, here's how you should think about it, and I'll give feedback as group feedback and post that up. This one, I heard through the grapevine that people were starting to freak out about the assignment, and I thought it was best to nip that in the bud. So
hi folks. I gather you're working hard on your literature reviews, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how those might be organized for writing up. It turns out that there's not really a set of steps to go through as there were for the design section of your last paper. Unfortunately, the literature review is a logical argument, and that has to come from the material you're reading.
Okay, so you get the feel for that, and it's just sort of, kind of massaging, giving them more information about the assignment. And that did calm people down, actually. That was pretty good. This one is occasioned by a posting that someone made that I thought was worthy of greater discussion, and I didn't want to wait a week to have that discussion. So
Hi, I want to address Matt's posting about whether or not a group of students entering into a university research doctorate might be considered entering a community practice. And at first I had said no, but then actually I misunderstood what you were saying, Matt, and I think I get you now. When I was
all right, so when I do my podcasts, I try to make them pretty much the way my instruction is, which you've probably figured by now is fairly casual. I don't read a script. On the other hand, I will give you this word of advice. Write down what you plan to say, or you'll wander and you'll end up with like an hour and a half of mush. So I've learned to make an outline and stick to it. And I've also learned to do it in pieces and then stitch it together, because it's easier than trying to stay on track for the whole time. So you could hear in there some kind of clumsy editing. You don't have to be a pro. I'm just doing this at home with my trusty little Snowball microphone, which I finally invested in because I wanted less hiss on my recordings. And then I got real fancy and bought this little sucker, which hooks up to the edge of my desk. And you'll see this in like recording studios. It avoids the popping pee that you get when you record. And once you record your voice and you hear it, you'll want it because you feel really self-conscious about the pee pops. So I just put that in front of it and everything's good to go. But it doesn't really require a lot of high tech. Dr. Hurd in his presentation mentioned Audacity, which is my program of choice for doing editing. It looks really exotic when you open it because it's got all this stuff, you know, like, woo, what is all that stuff? But it's really pretty straightforward. You just hit record, you talk, it lays out the blah, 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 blah. And then you can go in there and do things if you've got an I'm an ummer. So I try to take my ums out, squish it together, or I'll take out a piece where I misspoke and put in another section where it's real simple. It outputs as an MP3, which allows you to, it saves space and it will run on everybody's MP3 player, which they love. So I highly recommend you look into it, and it's pretty cheap, as I recall. All right, so here's the third kind of podcast I do. We have some really hard readings. I tend to be kind of on the hard side, and I was starting to feel some of the anxiousness. So I thought what I needed to do was give people kind of a context for the reading. Some readings have a political context or an historical context, and I wanted to help them into the reading. So here's one that's getting them ready to read.
I apologize in advance for my funny voice. I've got
forgot about that.
Remnants of a cold. All right, so chapter 3 is a complex bridging chapter.
This is before the screen.
Classic Vygotskian theory description to more of an applied and extended version of that theory. So this chapter moves us into activity theory and starts to get us thinking about current applications.
So you can see it's sort of almost a personal introduction to your reading. Very easy to do. No excuse for them after that point, and they appreciate it quite a bit. So those are the other things I do with podcasts that aren't just straight up lecture. The feedback piece, the group feedback piece is very highly regarded. They'll listen to that a lot. You can literally, as you're reading papers and grading them, just start taking down the common problems or notes, or circling a section you want to quote in your podcast, and just sort of get it all at once. And as someone who gets a lot of papers to read, it's easier than having to write the same type of critique over and over and over on papers. So I do recommend that, and you can post it very easily. I haven't been using iTunes University, that Pepperdine has, but you certainly can. I just put mine up in the resource folder in Sakai. And those are the two main tricks of the trade, on forums and podcasts that I have for you, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, those are the main things, I think, that I wanted to discuss. Question?
Sometimes faculty, especially that are new to this, might wonder, how do they actually grade? How do you assess, do you have a rubric that, okay, clearly the grammar wasn't very good, but the content was good? How do you actually...
Forums?
Yeah, for forums, like, do you do it kind of tallying things as they go? Do you do an aggregate, after the end, the gist? Do you grade something in the beginning so you have a beginning point so then you can assess at the end, wow, you made a lot of change and improvement since the beginning? You know, how do you...
How do I do that? Okay. To be honest, I rely on just my experience with doing forums and the fact that these guys are marching through as a cohort, so I know them and I know who's likely to need watching. And what we used to have, and someday hopefully we'll have again, is the ability to put stars or flags or otherwise mark a particularly good posting. So what I will do instead is email myself, I'll use that email feature to myself, and paste in the person's posting. And then I've got sort of a collection of good things, and I can see who's made contributions that I thought were good and who hasn't. I don't like to go back through them at the end of the semester because there'll be hundreds of them, and I really don't want to read them again. So that's the main thing I do is I email myself the good ones, and I can note that somebody's done that. I will also go into statistics and take a look, and if there's someone who's really low or who didn't download things that they were supposed to have downloaded, I mean, you can really learn a lot from the back end of stats, but you have to be careful because of that mark everything read thing. Doesn't necessarily mean people have read them. Nor does the fact that they haven't read that many mean that they didn't read them. Because remember, if you're reading everything in a string, it doesn't show up. Also, sheer numbers aren't enough. Not everything everybody puts up there is good stuff. So rather than have to go back at the end, yeah, it's kind of thinking. We won't show. Ignore the man behind the mirror there, or behind the curtain there. But what you have to do is really keep track of it as you go. Otherwise, it's just impossible. And part of that 4-week, 12-week thing is a way to make myself stop and sort of check what's going on, make notes. And I will send Alan, if he only has 4 or 5 postings, a private email saying, Alan, I noticed you really only have 4 or 5 postings up there, and we're in week 6, so you really need to step it up. Is there something I should know that you're having trouble with? Or I might send to somebody else a note saying, we're in the 6th week and you have 125 postings. You might want to dial it down a little and give other people a chance to take the floor. I appreciate, your energy level, but, make some space for other people. So because I do that at 4 and 12 weeks, then there's no surprises at the end of the semester. And I do recommend you do that.
Do you ever use the watch feature to receive emails of everybody's posts?
No, not really. I know that's an option. I do for assignment drop-offs. I'll watch that and know when things are coming, and I tend to do that as I say, give me the group. I don't do it daily because I've got so many emails. I don't need more. So you can see here's assignment 2. I can set it up to watch. I guess I don't have an assignment I could show you that with. I don't like the assignments box because a lot of times I like students to see each other's work, but I'm experimenting with it this year because I like the easy grading feature. That really helps a lot. And I do use a wiki, which is another place for students to engage other than forums. So one of the things you need to think about with Sakai is how big the sandbox is. It's not just forums. And again, you have to go into the wiki and set permissions. But one of the things, not so much in this class, but in this other class, we had a really good conversation going and wanted to capture. I was explaining to them how I'd set the permissions because they were saying they couldn't get in, and I said, yes, you can, look. All right, so they had a homework one where they had to go out and find good links for something, and their job is to come into the wiki now and post all the good links so that they'll be in one place, because I had done it as individual assignments, meaning they couldn't see each other's papers, but I wanted them to share out the good stuff. And then this piece, we had a conversation in Illuminate where we made a table, and we really liked it, and one of the students was going to put it in here, so I made a space for her to put it in. So asynchronous conversation isn't just in forums. It can be in wikis, it can be in, some of you use blogs. I don't like the blogs as much just because it's another place I have to go to that has long entries, and students feel neglected if you ask them to blog and you don't comment on their blog. They get very freaky deaky about that. You know, aren't you reading it? Why don't you like me? So it's a little easier in forums where there's a community there, and as long as you're checking in regularly, people are a little easier about whether they're being read or not. But there are many places where you can find commentary going on that expands the class discussion, not just in forums. I know that wasn't the best answer for you, but I know there's a great option on forums, but I just don't want to go there. I'm asking people to sort of put themselves out there. You know, nobody wants to raise their hand and be wrong in the classroom discussion. And if you're grading the classroom discussion, that really can put a chill on things. You know, no one's going to raise their hand unless they're totally sure they're right. So no one's going to post unless they think they've nailed it, and you really don't want that. So I don't even go there.
But at the same time, you weighted 10 to 30%. You know, at the end of the day, how much of that 30% are they getting? Is it because, well, you were a lurker, you didn't post until the end, so you're
Lurking
not
doesn't
getting
count.
much?
Lurking doesn't count. You know, that's why I have that comment in there about, you know, you can't learn from just reading. You have to act on that information. Yeah, I like I said, I try to keep notes on who's doing what, and then in those 4 and 12-week turnbacks, suggest to people, you know, you should take more risk, or you should engage more, or you should, you know, it's great to tell stories from the workplace, but that's not sufficient. You know, I'll give them fairly pointed feedback. You need to connect that with the readings more, or you're up here in abstract land, it would be really good if you could also connect that with practice. So either way, try and give people pointers. And you have a sense, if you're reading this stuff regularly, you have a sense of who's fallen off the wagon, and you can talk to those people, or at least I have a sense of that.
Would you have any advice or suggestions for those faculty that are new, but they hear about this thing called you must post once and reply twice? You know, that kind of, what would your response be to that strategy?
This is, you know, my personal thing. Your mileage may differ, but I find when you template things like that, you get really formalized responses. It's just a real joy killer. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know, people just meet the minimum requirement. It's a compliance check, and I avoid compliance checks completely. You know, someone will be struggling to find that second posting, and they'll just put something crummy up there, and then pretty soon you've got enough crummy stuff up there, it starts to pull the whole conversation down. So, and I've told students, you know, you don't have to have something to say about everything, but you should have something to say about most things. And it's okay if you didn't like chapter 2. Tell me why you didn't like chapter 2. So I don't put numbers on it. I've been down that road, and it just didn't work. It seemed like it was more of a problem than a solution. So I avoid that. Some people maybe manage it better than I do. But I'll tell you, that self-reflection piece, find a posting you did that moved the conversation forward in the classroom, or find a posting that someone else made that can't be your own, that was the most valuable to you. That gets people sort of going back and saying, wow, what have I said? You know, what's good? And they're rereading their stuff, and they're reading other people's stuff, and it's kind of you can't avoid the comparison. That's a good one if you're having problems, and you don't want to wait too long to do it, but you have to wait long enough that there's enough stuff up there that they can find things. So that's a good midterm kind of thing to do. Question, Robin?
Did you say that last part, you're explicit about that as a homework assignment in the syllabus? You don't just...
I've made it a paper. I've made it like a formal paper, given it more credence than homework, where I've said, you know, no, this is like,
okay,
this counts for a lot.
And that would address the grading and the assessment side.
Yeah,
too.
I guess it would. Yeah, I guess it would. Yeah, definitely. Because homework, you know, there's many homeworks, and you can always blow one off, but
Well, as opposed to a new discussion topic in the middle of the term, which is find a classmate's posting that you find significant or valuable or
Yeah.
a specific contribution.
That would be an interesting way to go. A long time ago I did that, when we had a forum set up, I think it was back in Usenet, where it was easier to cut and copy and paste stuff around. But then again, it's sort of like the star problem. I mean, when we did have Blackboard and we did have the ability to mark or flag individual posts, I at one time had students mark. You could put 4 or 5 stars, but you couldn't put anything lower, because I didn't want to know what was awful. I just want to know what was great. So, and that way you sort of take the pressure off. People don't have to worry quite as much about, somebody's going to put a 1 on my posting. And that was okay, but students were still pretty reluctant about grading other students publicly. So it worked better as a private assignment. But you could try it both ways, see how it goes.
And in introducing the discussion forums, because I teach a first term, first class, as you're talking about it, I'm thinking, to describe the forums as sort of an extension of the discussion in the classroom, because we don't meet in person every week. This is your opportunity, so that they're not. Some classes have created their own Facebook site, but
that's different.
That's different. I hope they're not really having discussions over there.
They probably are, but
they probably are. So I think I would emphasize more that discussion forum.
What I've told students is, when I used to take classes, standard face-to-face graduate classes, I'd be walking back to the car in the parking lot, and I would think of the right thing to say. And it was like the class was over, and there was no way for me to get some credit for that. The clever remark or the insight or whatever. Or sometimes I would have really good discussions with people after class in the hallway, and there was no way to get that into the space of what counted for the class. So I tell them, now you've got that opportunity. You can post at 2 in the morning for all I care. If the clever thing comes to you later, put it in. And if you're trying to create low threshold of entry into the activity. So what you're trying to do is make it friendly, inviting, serious, but not overly focused on assessment. Because as you said, it's an extension. It's like, sometimes I'll joke, it's like the hamburger helper of the class. We can sort of stretch what we were doing in class. Which reminds me, sometimes we have 2 interesting kinds of forum posts that we'll put up. One is stuff that came up in conversation that we didn't get to, or we didn't finish, or we have more to say about. Sometimes it's links, sometimes it's an argument that was going on at the end of the class, and I'll start a forum, or I'll say to somebody, go take that to the forums and start a thread on that. So that's one way to sort of really push on that notion of expanding classroom time. I just forgot what the second one was, but it's along the same lines, where you're making connections to the formal face-to-face synchronous time.
Before the session, you mentioned that you were also using, in the session you mentioned use of announcements, for instance, the strategy of a hiatus if things are going well.
Yeah.
But aren't you using announcements as well on a weekly basis?
Yes. Yes. I'm big on weekly announcements. Partly, I'll be honest, it helps me remember what we're doing. I've got a lot going on too, and I'll go in there and say, week 5, what are we doing? Oh yeah, okay. And I'll write up week 5, we're focusing on this. And or if I've made a change, it's a good place to highlight the change. Remember, that paper's been pushed back to this date. And here's this week, because I've got so much going on. Let me get home for a minute. Go home. I have actually given them a hiatus. I've said, look, take some time, do something else.
Do you remind them about their forum postings or anything like that?
No.
Here?
Only at the first class that you have with the newbies, the first semester. There's a lot of flogging at the beginning, where in announcements it's like, well, you know, it's the second week and I still haven't heard from some of you. That's kind of like skipping class 2 weeks in a row, you know. So I'll say that. But after a while, I don't do that. Yeah, announcements is another place where I will say, you know, this week around about Wednesday, I'm going to be closing off the discussion on such and such and moving us forward to another discussion. So that's another place to give people a heads up on that. I'll announce changes, like I said, due dates and things there. Those are the main things I use for announcements. What else have I done with announcements? That's mostly what I've done with announcements.
So weekly, even if just a weekly touch point.
Yep. And it'll say, you know, we're coming up to the big conference. Make sure you've figured out what sessions you're going to be attending and you've posted in blah, blah, blah. So it's just kind of weekly announcements, almost like you would get in elementary school over the intercom, to remind them, you know, there is or isn't something due, that kind of thing. And then the nice thing about the assignment box is it will put an announcement out there when it goes live, which is kind of nice. What else? I talk about my syllabi as versions. So on the first week of class, we have version, actually sometimes we'll call it version 0.9. I'll say we're in beta. It's a tech group, so I can talk that way. Or I'll say we're at 1.0. And then, for instance, we just had an experience in one of the classes where we're making an alteration to the syllabus to accommodate some additional work. Excuse me. So I will post a new syllabus and say version 1.1 is now up. And I put that in resources, actually. What else do I do? This group, I guess they started blogging. Some of them did, but for the most part, they're not. You can see down here, I always have the calendar live so they can see when Illuminate sessions are coming up. Oh, the other thing that nobody's really talked about Illuminate, and it's not that I want to talk about Illuminate, but there is one thing I do that I think is useful. When a class begins, I ask someone to volunteer to be the indexer. And the index feature is underneath the tools menu of Illuminate. And what it does is put little bookmarks on the recording. And the person who's the indexer gets to decide what the labels will be on those bookmarks. So it might be discussion of paper, it might be comparison between Vygotsky and Piaget, or whatever the topic is. And they can put those little bullet marks in, or flags, so that when the student goes to play it back again, they can see topics and jump topic to topic and not have to watch the whole thing in, you know, an hour of time. And I try to move that around. I ask for a volunteer. And the trick is you have to make that person a moderator. You have to right-click their name and set them as moderator, and then they can do it. And it's kind of like the person who takes notes at the board in a sense. And it's just another way to keep them engaged. I'll sometimes pick someone I think is not that engaged and ask them to do it to sort of force them to be more engaged. I don't know what Crystal's doing there, but
she's turned her thing on to all sites. Notice it says session type all sites.
Okay.
So she basically just
I didn't know that
pushed
was
it
possible.
to every single site in the
Okay, well mine are sort of semi-private because we get a little goofy in my conversations. So those are the main elements of what I do, I guess. Anything else?
It's very helpful.
It's very helpful.
Cool. Try and keep it fun. Sometimes we have a section that's jokey that we put over in logistics to keep it separate. We have a running thing about internet memes.
So my last question would be for your fellow faculty members, would you advise them if they're struggling, because you know the tool is called forums and there's this thing in it called a forum, but a forum technically is all it is a heading. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. So would you advise them to think of topics as forums? If they're tripping up on the word forum, think of topics as the forum, and then they have multiple topics?
Yeah, the forums are actually pretty complex. I still get confused by it because in a forum, you've got a forum's like a meta category, as it turns out. And if you don't do anything, when your class first populates, you get this thing. You get, you know, your class label, which isn't what I want. And I could probably go in and change it, but what I do is I just put the logistical stuff and general things there. And you can see there's the links from class discussion. Then when you make a forum, it asks you to describe it, and usually I don't want to describe it. I don't want a lot of text underneath. See how there's text here underneath the header? I really don't want that. I just want the big header. And then you can go into that forum and have separate threads. And it took me a while, and like I say, I still sometimes get confused, but I try to do meta level stuff for forums. And then, so this is a book chapter, and then within the chapter, there's multiple topics that we can discuss within the chapter. That to me makes sense, is to do, I do it in chunks of reading, or I do it around a paper. We're going to China later this year, and so we've started discussing China. That's a link to a video and then discussion of that video. But the forum, each forum is a meta level object, and that's what you have to keep in mind. You don't want to, you do have to sort of plan ahead. And like I said, I do readings and big chunks, like topical chunks. And then if you want to have multiple separate topics underneath a forum, you can. I hope that made sense.
Makes sense to me, but
okay.
I guess my key thing is just remembering that.
And that's why I don't want students with the power to create forums, because they'll just blah, blah. They don't have any sense of hierarchies. And there'll be things that are really kind of small ideas that are up on a forum level, and it's a mess. So I'll set up a forum and let them post the threads. I'll say, okay, here's chapter 4. What do you want to talk about? And then they have to go in and put up threads. So, anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.